The familiar blue lights of the Maury Show set shone brightly, illuminating the stage where Snow White sat nervously in a plush chair. Her signature black bob and red headband looked timeless, but the wide-eyed princess was not here to discuss her fairy tale life. No, today she was here for a much more modern problem. Welcome back to the Maury Show, everyone. Maury Povich greeted the audience, who cheered loudly. Today, we have a very special guest. You all know her from the classic fairy tale, but she's dealing with something that has haunted her ever since that fateful day in the forest. The audience buzzed with anticipation as Maury turned to Snow White. "Please welcome Snow White," he announced. The audience erupted in applause, but Snow White merely smiled nervously, clutching her hands together. "Snow White, thank you for being here," Maury began, taking a seat across from her. "You've been through quite a lot in your life, haven't you?" Snow White nodded, her voice soft but clear. "Yes, I have, Maury. But what I'm here to talk about today is something that continues to affect me. Ever since that day." Maury leaned in, concerned. "You're talking about the poisoned apple?" "Yes," she sighed, glancing down. "It was a simple, beautiful apple, but it nearly ended my life. Ever since then, I can't even look at apples without feeling a wave of fear." The audience murmured sympathetically. Maury turned to the camera. "Snow White has developed a crippling fear of apples, folks, a phobia so intense that she can't even be in the same room with one." Snow White nodded again. "It's true. Even walking through the fruit section of the market fills me with dread. I have nightmares about apples, the shiny red ones especially." The camera panned to the audience, showing concerned faces and a few murmurs of understanding. Maury straightened up, his tone serious. "We've brought in some help today, Snow White. Dr. Green, a specialist in phobias, is going to join us in a moment to help you overcome this fear." Snow White looked hopeful, but still tense. "But first," Maury said, leaning toward her, "there's something we have to do." He motioned to the side of the stage, and a crew member emerged, holding something behind their back. The audience gasped. "No, no, no." Snow White's eyes widened in horror. Maury raised a hand. "Don't worry, we won't make you touch it, but you need to face your fear." He signaled, and the crew member revealed a perfectly shiny red apple. Snow White immediately recoiled, pushing herself back in her chair. The audience held their breath. "It's okay, Snow White," Maury said gently. "Take a deep breath. This apple can't hurt you." She hesitated, her eyes locked on the fruit, memories of the evil queen, the bite that had sealed her fate, and the cold sleep that followed flooded her mind. But then she took a deep breath. "I want to do this," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Maury smiled, encouraging her. "You can do it, just one step at a time." Snow White slowly leaned forward, her eyes still glued to the apple. The audience cheered softly, supportive but not overwhelming. Her hand trembled as she reached out. "I know this isn't the same apple," she said aloud, as if convincing herself. "It's not from her. It's just a regular apple." "That's right," Maury said gently. She stopped a few inches from the fruit, her hand shaking. But instead of pulling away, she let out a shaky breath and finally let her fingers graze the smooth surface of the apple. The audience burst into applause, some standing in support. Snow White smiled, a little shaky but proud. "I did it," Maury grinned. "Maury did, and with Dr. Green's help, we'll work on this even more." Dr. Green entered the stage, offering more encouragement, but the hardest part was already behind her. Snow White had taken the first step toward conquering her fear. "I never thought I'd touch an apple again," Snow White said softly, as the audience continued to cheer her on. Maury smiled warmly. "Sometimes the things that scare us the most are the very things we need to face head-on. You've made incredible progress today, Snow White." Snow White, still a little pale, nodded. "It's a start. Maybe one day I'll even be able to eat one again." The audience roared with approval as the camera zoomed in on Snow White, her once terrifying enemy sitting harmlessly in her lap. And so, the episode ended on a hopeful note. Snow White had taken a big step toward reclaiming her life from her fear of apples, proving that even fairy tale princesses sometimes need a little help from modern-day heroes like Maury Povich.